What's good, YouTube? This is Who Is Like God, and today we're going to be talking about Mary Magdalene because she was, as far as I'm concerned, one of our spiritual foremothers. See, I got this playlist where we talk about the spiritual forefathers of the faith from the perspective of the scriptures and even church history, old saints back in the day who ran the race that was ahead of them before our time, looking at their example to help us in our own walk. And we're starting with various figures in the scriptures. And Mary Magdalene is a great example because she was someone who Yeshua, actually casted demons out of. 7 demons she had. So this was originally a demon-possessed woman who, after she was freed from demonic possession, she actually began to follow Jesus. And you see that in Luke chapter 8. Also, some of the women who have been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. It's talking about those who are following Jesus. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had been gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's household manager, and Susanna, and many others who provided for them out of their means. The thing about Mary Magdalene is we know she would have a relationship with Jesus and the apostles from what we can glean from all the Gospels, like that whole scene with Mary and Martha, where Martha was kind of pressed because she was trying to serve Jesus, and Mary was actually listening attentively to Jesus, and Mary was vindicated, and Martha was corrected a little bit because Mary wasn't paying attention more to the things that are more important. Mary, as well as some other women, but especially Mary, is directly name dropped as one of the first people to see Jesus resurrect, to actually witness the empty tomb. In Luke 24:10 it says, "Now it was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other woman with them, who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter rose and ran to the tomb. Stopping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home marveling at what had happened." Why is that so incredible? Before the apostles themselves believed, there was a time when the apostles themselves actually thought that it was a fairy tale that Jesus rose from the dead, which is actually embarrassing. That the apostles, with the authority that they had, and the complete 180 that they would later make, that the foundation of their testimony is that they thought this whole thing was a fairy tale from the ground up, and it was actually women who were going around, the first witnesses who actually genuinely believed at the beginning, even before the apostles. So you can really say that Mary Magdalene was the first preacher, which was a woman. The first preacher was a woman according to scripture. It's also true how you define your terms. When I'm talking about preacher, I'm not talking about any type of church government or church authority, any type of bishop or pastor or deacon or whatever. I'm not talking about any office within the church. When I say preacher, I mean someone who actually evangelizes and tells people the good news of Christ, which is a pretext to them coming to the Lord and getting baptized and then joining a church after that. So from the prospect of an actual preacher, someone who preaches the word, which is something I believe we're all called to do, the very first person to do that was a woman, which is really an exalting thing when you understand that culture where the testimony of woman was not given much weight. If you want to talk about sexism, that was actual sexism, the culture in that day. They didn't value the testimony or beliefs of women in legal matters. What this also shows is that Mary Magdalene, who is a real historical person, is one of the building blocks, one of the pieces of glue that shows the authenticity of all of this. Because not only do we have the fact that the earliest apostles believed that it was a fairy tale that Jesus rose from the beginning, which is extremely embarrassing, and the fact that they made a total 180 based on various New Testament and outside documents from the first century and centuries afterward. Not only are the apostles themselves a testimony, the fact that shows how legitimately they believed to the point of death, and they didn't even believe at first, which is a huge embarrassing thing to admit, is in the very same passage. Well, the apostles, the leaders, thought that the resurrection of the Lord was a fairy tale. It was actually a woman who believed, Mary Magdalene, a demon-possessed woman at that, who was possibly a prostitute in her past life. A demon-possessed woman was the one who knew before anyone else that the Lord had risen from the dead. In a culture, they didn't trust the testimony of women at all. So we see how Jesus talks about how the humble will be exalted and the exalted will be humbled, and how he talks about how great are the least of these, and calling back the least of these to himself, and how the first shall be last and the last shall be first. There's basically like a great reversal where everyone is put on an equal playing field before the Lord, and Jesus is really going after the people whom society casts out. We see how this comes full circle in the resurrection itself. The thing is, if you want to have a movement to either preach truthfully or even manipulate. To even get to that point, it has to get off the ground first. You see what I'm saying? So to do that, you're not going to do things that are going to shoot yourself in the foot if you're lying. So the fact that the apostles didn't even believe it at first, and then we know on record that they did later on in their lives before they passed away, and the fact that the first testimony came from women who were believed to be demon-possessed that genuinely saw the Lord rose, it was their testimony that was the foundation for everything else for the past 2,000 years, even before the apostles. All of these are great marks of authenticity in the culture that they came from. On record, we have ancient people making fun of Christians because some of the earliest believers were females. Females that have a little bit of a treacherous past. For Mary Magdalene, and scripturally, we know for sure that she was possessed by demons, so whatever situation led her to interact with evil spirits that she got possessed in the first place is we don't know. But there's also ancient people that connected Mary Magdalene with the idea of the prostitute, who honored Jesus. That's not made explicit in scripture, but ancient church writers did make that connection. If that is true, that it was the same woman, then Mary Magdalene does have a prostitute background, which could have been the catalyst for the demon possession if that is true. Either way, these aren't women who are at the high level of society. These are normal people with a dubious past, and they're the ones that the Lord chose to be the catalyst for the world changing, the catalyst for the world being as we know it now for the past 2,000 years. The gospel spread to every nation, tongue, and tribe. And there's still work to do. There's still people that know the Jesus, but just the massive scale to every continent for the last 2,000 years. Foundation because of women. You see what I'm saying? So I'm not like a modern, you know what I'm saying, feminist, blue-haired type of individual. So please don't get it twisted. But understand that scripturally speaking, don't let anyone deceive you into thinking that women aren't exalted or that women don't have rights, that women aren't. You see what I'm saying? Because from a theological vantage point, look at how beautiful the great God who created the universe. Look at the people that he used to reveal himself and spread the message. Mary Magdalene is a great testimony of faith, a great testimony of obedience, a great testimony of loyalty. After her demons were cast out, she kept following Jesus and was rewarded with being one of the first people to actually see him resurrect and see the empty tomb. So her loyalty was rewarded. Not only is that a great lesson of loyalty that we can see from Mary Magdalene, but we can also see her great faith, the great revelation that was bestowed upon her. And even the concept of not wavering when people think you're crazy, or like being willing to stand for the truth when everyone else either stands for a lie or doesn't believe the truth. You could try to put that in like today's cultural climate. You could think about Daniel in the lion's den, where everyone else kneeled before the pagan statue, but the men of God, the Hebrews, stayed standing up because they wouldn't kneel before a pagan thing. Whatever thing you want to relate it to. The apostles themselves thought that Jesus' resurrecting was a fairy tale at the very beginning, at a time when it was only the woman who knew that Jesus rose. And the apostles actually get chastised later on because of it. I believe that's in the Gospel of Mark that says that, the long ending of Mark. So the fact that not only do we have the testimony of her loyalty and her obedience to the Lord, which are great, especially loyalty, great qualities we should have. Our loyalty is to Yahweh, our loyalty is to the Most High. From Mary Magdalene, not only is there that lesson, but just the fact that being willing to stand for the truth, being willing to stand for what you know to be true, even when everyone else thinks you're crazy. Because in due time, truth will be vindicated. The Lord said, wisdom is justified by her children. True wisdom, the truth, is always going to be vindicated in the end. And while Mary was proclaiming the empty tomb and the resurrection of the Lord, and the apostles thought it was a fairy tale, in due time the apostles became to realize the truth. They came to realize the same thing, and Peter actually himself went and confirmed what the woman had been saying. The truth was vindicated, but the woman, Mary Magdalene, stood on it. She stood on business, even when the men of God, the apostles themselves, thought she was crazy at the very beginning. This is the testimony of the fact that we're all humans, and the testimony to standing on the truth of God, even when it makes you uncomfortable. So there's a lot of things from Mary Magdalene's testimony that are universal for all believers today. And as part of our Spiritual Forefathers playlist, that includes the four mothers, and I wanted to shine some light. Y'all be blessed in the Most High. If you have any questions, I pray I can answer them to the best of my ability. I'm just a kid after all, or I guess a young man. I'm not a minor no more. Y'all be blessed in the Most High, and I see you in the next one, all right? Peace.